Well, Lloyds and Mental Health UK have got together, and the main thing is the hashtag Get the Inside Out. And we all kind of putting post-its on our head and putting it on Twitter and stuff. Yeah. And it's all about, you know, trying to end the stigma and get everyone talking about it. And
what made you want to get into that campaign and back it?
I think for me, just any chance I get, I try and get as involved as possible. I've openly spoken about my struggles with depression and anxiety, and I've noticed a massive difference from when I first spoke to now, how much everyone does talk about it. And there has been a massive change, but I just still think there's always just still a lot further to go.
And do you still find it hard to talk about it?
Yeah, I do. It's a weird one. It's weird that everyone knows. It's refreshing that everyone knows. Yeah. I was always, and kind of sometimes still am, scared of being the poster girl for depression, you know? Like, oh, she's miserable, that one, you know? And I know that's probably not really how people think, but it does make me nervous about doing too much.
Is it because you're embarrassed about having depression?
Not embarrassed, but I don't want it to to who I am.
Yeah. Is it more that you don't want the people to think that's all that you are?
Yeah.
My husband suffers from depression. He says the same thing. He said, you know, because sometimes I've just got normal sadness, and it might not be that, and people go, oh, you're depressed.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so brilliant that everybody's talking about it.
When did you first become aware that you might have depression? How young were you?
I'd suffered with anxiety from a really, really young age. So when I was really young, I used to have an inhaler because sometimes I couldn't breathe properly. I had numerous blood tests because I always had stomach aches and stuff. And and then it wasn't until in the Saturdays when I realised what it was, when I went to the doctors and he kind of said, oh, I think you should go and see someone. And I instantly was like, oh, well, if I go and see a therapist, then that means I'm crazy, you know. It took me a long time to come round to that. And I genuinely believe if back then mental health was spoken about as much as it is now, that maybe my anxiety may, I don't know, I'm not a professional, may not have got to the point that it did, because I would have been aware of it and we could probably maybe would have sorted it out a lot sooner.
When you say that, what do you mean? What point did it get to?
I got to the point where I just couldn't cope with everyday life. I was never suicidal, but I had those thoughts of, oh, if I would be better off if I wasn't here, and I just kind of felt that worthlessness. And, you know, I was working all the time, and it got to the point where I felt like I had to become a character of myself to walk into a room and be Frankie from the Saturdays.
Which I presume would just exacerbate.
Band, oh my God, it's the schedule is insane in a band, isn't it? You're just you don't have a second to yourself, really.
No, and I think it would have probably become that anyway.
Do you think being in the band and in the spotlight made it worse, your anxiety and depression?
I don't really know, to be honest. I think luckily back then social media wasn't as big as it is now. So I don't think I wasn't as aware of what people thought of me and stuff. I think it was just probably tiredness and just the kind of more keeping it a secret, pretending to everyone that it's amazing how many conversations
you heard earlier we were talking about postnatal anxiety. Did you find having children made it worse, or did it make it better for you?
For me, it actually made it better. Everyone thought I would get postnatal depression, and so did I. And I don't know if it was because everyone was so aware of it with me. I was lucky, so everyone was kind of on top of it.
It's a huge misconception, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you suffer from depression, that you're instantly going to get postnatal depression.
And I'm normally worse when I'm pregnant, which is actually really common. And you can't treat it as well, you know, because you're pregnant.
Did Wayne help you get through it?
Yeah, massively, bless him. It happened really early on in our relationship, and he could have walked the other way, and he didn't, and he worked really hard to understand it. And I think that's the hardest thing with friends and family, is that it's hard to not take it personally.
I have to work really hard at that with my husband when he's, you know, in a down time, because I know that it's got nothing to do with me, but you do want to scream sometimes, but I'm here, I'm lovely, you've got the kids, you've got that, and so I can sympathise with Wayne in that.
And I think that's the hardest part, and I think that's why it's just as important to talk about it, not necessarily for the people with a mental illness, happiness as much for other people around them, because people don't know what to say. You don't know whether to approach someone or not. I'm exactly the same. I probably wouldn't even really know what to say. And I think it is that thing of just learning that it's not because of you, but I do think that's probably got to be one of the hardest parts.
And my husband was sometimes saying, I wonder if it's the same. He says, sometimes when I'm in a really dark pit, I feel like I have to pull myself up to show everyone that I'm happy. And then, of course, makes the anxiety worse. And
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it, especially, you know, I've got 2 young kids now.
Yeah.
Back in the day, I could have stayed in bed all day, and that's not healthy, so it's probably good with the boys that I do have to, but some days you do just think...
Do you get any separation anxiety, which is what Christine was talking about?
Yeah, I have it really bad with the children. I never had anxiety before. It was just since I've had the children, it just builds up whenever I'm away from them. It's an awful lot worse. Was that something you experienced?
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I think because I've always been really busy since I had my first, I'm kind of used to, once I'm away, I miss them obviously and stuff, but I'm okay, but it's the build-up to going away. I'll get really stressed, I'll get really anxious.
So it's anxiety about the anxiety that's going to come.
Yeah, it's really weird. And I heard you saying about being on a flight. And I went on my honeymoon and I already had my first. I didn't have a panic attack, but I suddenly started crying. My husband was like, "What is wrong with you?" And I was like, "We haven't done a will. We haven't done anything. What happens if, you know, if we both go?"
So many people
and he was like, "We're on our honeymoon."
It's something about aeroplanes. When we get into aeroplanes, we think about, whereas we don't think that when we get into a car.
And go down the M25.
People die in car crashes.